honest about it. Okay? Especially if someone's in the rack and I'm pointing out, what else going on so we can see everybody. Okay? Do you trust us now? Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're highly trained with these weapons, okay? It doesn't come out once we get presented with another weapon.
Ms. Hammer?
Thank you.
Or, excuse me, are there questions for Lieutenant Brady?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Commissioner Siegel.
as a point of clarification, I had asked to see these lapel cameras here in the hearing room rather than at the IRO's office. To a certain extent, them showing at least these two out of the three that are apparently extant is very useful to me, but in certain ways, the answer to a question that I had, and I would like to grant APD further time to make verbal explanations of the events of the day if they care to. So far, all they've done is really answer a question that I had made prior to the hearing. So I would like to ask the chair's indulgence that we grant more time to APD as well, so they can explain to the extent necessary the officer's actions. That's up to you, Mr. Chairman, first, I suppose.
If you can do it briefly.
In many ways, the lapel camera speaks for itself, and Ms. Hammer is going to present, in her presentation is going to bring up some important points that I think will probably answer your questions. So I'm going to defer my time to now Ms. Hammer to make her presentation at this point, Commissioner.
All right, thank you. Ms. Hammer.
Thank you. As you saw from the video, the officers were in the home for approximately 2 minutes and 50 seconds. In her complaint, Ms. Batista said that the officers were in her home for 30 minutes. When Ms. Hitana was interviewed, she said they were in their home for 20 to 30 minutes. What happened here was an occasion in which an individual had called 911 to report that a friend of theirs was threatening to commit suicide. That individual met the police officers on the side of the street, and that's what was shown at the beginning part of that video. Was the caller was not talking directly to Officer F, the lapel camera we saw, but to another officer. That person, who was 2 to 3 doors away from Ms. Batista's home, gave the officers the address that belonged to Ms. Batista. The officers had a reasonable belief, had reason to believe that a gentleman talking to them 2 doors down, who had been to the home of his co-worker friend, knew her address. And even you can hear in the lapel camera from the second officer's lapel, he calls the radio, what's the address? Call the caller again, what's the address? And they give Ms. Batista's address the second and third time. The officers had reasonable belief that the home that they approached was the home of the person who was threatening suicide. Once they arrived at the home, they, as you heard, knocked and said, can we talk to you for a minute? And Ms. Batista said, sure, come on in. And even when the officers go to farther back in the house, she said, come on inside, but don't go back where the dogs are, further inviting the officers into her home. And what you saw were officers trying to quickly assess what was going on. There was delay between the first door knock and when anyone came to the door, which always causes concern for an officer. And you saw in the video what the actual hand was doing was, if I may demonstrate, a placing on the side. It wasn't a pulling, a grabbing, even a gripping. But the officer, when he first was in the courtyard area, had his hand on the side of his weapon. And when that officer goes further inside, that same officer, you can see him talking with his hands, so that hand is no longer on his weapon. Later, for a few seconds, he has it on his left hand, on his taser side, but one could argue that he's resting it there rather than, there's no indication that he was gripping his taser. It was a sad mistake, but it was a mistake that made by the caller, who was the friend of the potential suicide victim. Perhaps he was distraught at his friend. Later on, the videos show that they did go next door, which is where the person was, made contact with them, and did contact the person named Kathy, who was threatening suicide. And Kathy had a friend named Judith who was involved. And so they were asking for those two names once they were there in the house. And once they didn't find Kathy and Judith, they figured out it was the wrong house. They exited 2 minutes and 50 seconds later. The officers were polite and tried to explain. And as you can tell, Ms. Hitana at the very end even volunteers to the officers that their grandson is a police officer, and you can hear the officer saying, APD, is he with APD? And she says, oh no, he's with Rio Rancho. There was no indication that that they needed to in any way further explain what was going on, and in the end seemed to be a cordial encounter towards the end, and at no point made any threatening moves towards either resident. And it was basically, they needed to figure out that they did figure out that they were in the wrong place, and once they did that, they walked next door to the appropriate house and continued their activity to assist the person who was in fact threatening suicide and was at risk for ending her life. So it was an unfortunate accident, but certainly one in which the officers were well within the SOP of their actions. It was it was a mistake on the part of the caller who they had personal face-to-face contact with. It wasn't even like some dispatcher could have mixed it up. It was a guy who they talked to face-to-face, 2 doors down, who gave them the address of Ms. Hitana. And they had a belief that when they walked in there, that they were going to the right house. So I ask you to uphold my previous findings in the letters. In which I found that it was lawful and their actions were lawful and proper in the general conduct SOP of 1-4-1F. Personnel shall conduct themselves both on and off duty in a manner to reflect most favorably on the department. Thank you.
Other questions of Ms. Hammer? Commissioner Foster.
Hi, Earl. Both complainants quoted evidently things that officers have said.
Speaking to the microphone.
That both officers, both complainants quoted what officers said that they felt were inflammatory. Did your investigator look into these quotes?
I was somewhat confused by Ms. Hitana's presentation because she gave several quotes from an Officer Q, which comes up, I have no idea who Officer Q is and where the source of that information is. It's information that is outside the record and certainly not involving any officer involved in this case.
Again, I don't know, it doesn't make any difference whether it was Officer Q, that could be misinformation, but was that something that was originally placed into the complaint and that your investigator took a look at, as far as these inflammatory statements?
There were several erroneous, I would submit as erroneous statements in their complaint, which is approximately a page typed. It says, they said APD opened the door, which they never did say. It says, they tried to make me sit down, which they never did. Judith is committing suicide, don't you want us to help her? I think that that's a mischaracterization. They did say in their complaint, Ms. Batista did say in her complaint that you said, you know, suicide people have weapons. I think it's a fair characterization what the officer did say. But I would submit that most of what, or the majority of what Ms. Hitana submitted and Ms. Batista was not felt confirmed through the videotapes. They did talk about the fact that there were 4 officers in 3 videos. I've looked at all 3 videos, if you've seen 2 of them, there's nothing that indicates, there's, the entire contact from start to finish with both women was videotaped. You can briefly see at 5 minutes 40 seconds, the officer, when he's resting his hand on the gun outside in the courtyard. But there's nothing to indicate that we don't have the entirety of it, and there's those inflammatory statements were never found.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Shine.
if I could try to clarify, my impression from listening to Mrs. Gitana and Ms. Bautista is that they were quoting an Officer Q who had, and we can clarify this when one of them comes back for the last 5 minutes, but my impression is that Officer Q had nothing to do with this particular transaction. He was not in there. I don't know where they got Officer Q's quotes, but it had nothing to do with this transaction because there was no Officer Q. And certainly was no, and I watched all 3 videotapes of the IRO's office, and there was certainly no quotes like they attributed to Officer Q in the videotapes. So I think it was just reference to some unknown Officer Q that had nothing to do with this.
Any other questions for Ms. Hammer? Thank you, Ms. Hammer. Oh, excuse me, Commissioner Siegel.
Just as a point of clarification, there is no write-up of a missing, we have 4 officers there, and only 3 lapel cameras run, and there's no citation about that. Are all the officers supposed to have run a lapel camera?
He was sustained. There are 4 write-ups, and the 4th one was sustained.
What page is that on? I don't think page 6.
Okay, Ms. Bautista, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Cameron, please, before you start the clock, the gentleman, I'm sorry, to your right asked for the documents, saying that she...
Wait till you get to the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I have a loud voice.
Well, the public, the
sir,
watching public needs to hear you.
Thank you. Sir, you asked if I could provide documents to you showing that Ms. Gitana was a plaintiff, or yes, is that right? A complainant, and I have those documents here showing both her.
And bring them to Ms.
Yes, and they were
Siegel.
sent, I might add that they were sent and received by the POC, and it shows both her and I listed as complainants. Here's another one, sir. And those were by an attorney we hired to help us get through the legal paper shuffle, because we didn't know what to do.
Okay, if you would step to the microphone and your 5 minutes will begin.
And I can give you this one that shows the time allotted to us, sir. I'd like,
Mr. Chair, would you hold her time until we have a chance to assess this and understand what it means to the time that she's within allotted?
And I would ask that before we do anything, that I see those documents.
we don't have any objection to that, sir.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. The documents I presented, I went to see an attorney to help us figure out the paperwork. And those documents were written to the city of Albuquerque by our attorney, and it shows both of our names as complainants. So, you owe her time. I'd like to continue now.
Again, Mr. Chair, point of order, I would ask that her time be suspended at this moment so we can clarify the amount of time they were granted. And IRO Hammer has
Please, just,
asked that as well. So just
let me give this to you, Ms. Hammer.
while we're waiting, I would say that in my packet is one letter signed by the 2 women who have spoken to us about this complaint, making an appeal.
And if I may, the letters that were submitted were, it's a tort claim notice filed by their attorney, which is a totally separate proceeding from this procedure. The original complaint, which I could also provide to you, was signed by Ms. Bautista.
We will go with the original complaint from Ms. Hammer that came to the IRO's office. So, Ms. Bautista, you have 5 minutes
Yes, sir.
for
The letter-
rebuttal.
Thank you, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. She needs to set a clock. There you go. All right. First of all,
If you'll note the letter, quote, that went to the POC, it did not just go to the POC, it went to the mayor, it went to the police chief, and it went to the trainer, Mr. Wolf at the academy, and it also went to Jeff Proctor at the Albuquerque Journal. That letter was a letter that went out. The reason that I'm asking you to review this intrusion is because the lost camera has a lot to do with what was going on. The 3 lapel cameras that you saw I got them on one CD. So I don't know exactly how to read the time, because some of them said December 2005 and some of them said December 2012, and then there were some numbers by them. I'm not saying anything about time, I already talked about that. It's crazy when you're under those conditions, and let me tell you, a minute can seem like an eternity. Where I was at is what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to send the appeal back to the IRO. The investigation is not complete. I'd like to ask that in the future, cadets and recruits don't go on suicide runs. This isn't a field trip. I'd like to know whether it was a recruit or a cadet who moved his hand to his weapon. Oh yes, there was an officer out in the patio with his hand on his weapon, but the officer inside, when they surrounded me, moved his hand to his weapon quickly, not slowly. I can't get this on to show you what I want to show you. While attending the POC task force meeting, I talked to Stephanie Lopez, and again she said that there's several officers, senior officers, who have reached master's level in de-escalation training. And I'd like to request that your recommendations maybe be that those officers arrive first. It really makes a difference. That there be a less aggressive, less threatening, and less fear-inspiring approach to citizens like us, because they really scared us. I was affected in several ways. First of all, I had this dream, because I have a Japanese robe in my hallway, and every time I go down the hallway, you know, is that the officers walking towards me? Because he was a big man. In an intrusion, what would you do? I go back to the castle doctrine. You want to protect your home. I couldn't even call the police. The police were in my home. I don't understand the resistance in the police having to be defended when if something is wrong with the behavior, everybody can't say, all right, Officer J, why don't we see if we can't take a couple of classes and let's see if we can't soften our approach and work with citizens when we come to their door. They already knew I wasn't who they were looking for. I have the transcript from the dispatcher. She's skinny, she was wearing a black tank top, she might be Hispanic. Let me say something to you. As the officers approached my house, she walked out of her house, went to the garbage, it's on the camera, and went back to her house. And one officer says to the other, do you think it's the woman that was taking the garbage out? So they already had questions about that. I don't have any issues with the Albuquerque Police Department. I just feel that this was a very rude intrusion into our home. I answered the questions, and they should have left. Isn't it interesting? Judith is killing herself, and they're standing at my door explaining why the officer put his hand to his weapon. You're not out to help Judith. They were there a significant amount of time. I don't feel safe because of the confrontational approach. That was really scary. In this instance, the behavior was willful, and the conduct was unreasonable.
You have 30 seconds.
This incident really scarred my soul. I see police every day in my neighborhood, every single day, trying to help someone out. And now when I see the police, I turn and go in the other direction, because I'm scared that one of those officers who was in my home might be one of the officers that I might be running into. that I might run into, and that is really frightening. A man's home is his castle. Can you extend that to women too?
Thank you.
I appreciate the time, thank you. She has time left.
Mr. Chair.
Pardon me, Commissioner Shine.
I like my documents, sir.
Ms. Bautista, could you, I had a couple of questions for you. if you
Oh,
don't
yes,
mind.
sir, of course.
You and Ms. Gitana, is that the way you pronounce her name, Gitana?
Yes, sir.
You both made reference to Officer Q and quoted some outrageous things that this Officer Q said. Are you saying that Officer Q was in your house at this time, at the time of this incident?
No, sir, she was referring to a general mentality towards people by Officer Q, just as an example of comments.
But this Officer Q that you quoted had nothing to do with this incident?
No, sir.
Okay. Is that's correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The other thing, if I may, you indicated that you wanted the investigation sent back, the matter sent back to the IRO for investigation. First, let me say that unfortunately, even if we decided that that was the appropriate thing to do, we cannot do that because by terms of the union contract, the investigation can only continue for 90 days. That 90 days has expired. So it's one of the several defects in this whole system we have here of oversight. So we don't have the choice of sending it back. But even if we did, I thought you had said that you wanted it sent back because you didn't feel you had participated in the investigation. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct, sir.
But you were interviewed, were you not?
Would you like me to show you to answer your question? Well, I can answer your question quickly. I wrote actually we wrote it. She's a better typist than I am, here it is. We wrote one page and a quarter to the mayor, and that page and a quarter was what you received. We got 8 pages of investigative material, both from the IRO and Diane McDermott, I believe, was the investigative officer. We didn't even have to be here.
But I'm asking you, were you interviewed by the IRO's investigator?
No. Oh, you mean by Mrs. McDermott? Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
that's the independent office,
Yes.
independent review officer's investigator.
Yes.
And was Mrs. Gitana interviewed by her?
Yes, both of us were.
So you were interviewed, I mean, this investigation didn't proceed without your involvement, is that
Oh,
right?
no, we were initially interviewed, sir, by Diane McDermott, yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir.
Mr. Siegel. I'm sorry.
Following up from Commissioner Shine's question, you did request that the IRO, that we send it back to the IRO for new findings, and Commissioner Shine explained why we can't really do further investigations. But I thought you went on to say that you would request that she add to her letter that we request cadets and recruits not go on suicide calls.
Yes, I gave you
And-
some suggestions,
okay.
basically.
And if that were to be in her letter, which I don't know whether it can or not, I have an alternative for you in a moment. And the other request, I tried to write as fast as I could while you were talking, that de-escalation officers go on these calls or be the preferred officers, that more of them be trained. Is that your request as well?
Well, sir,
Help me out with what you said again.
yes, sir. I was with Stephanie Lopez of the Albuquerque Police Department Union at the last POC task force meeting where she gave testimony, it's recorded, and she said that there were several senior officers who were masters, and because they had taken the de-escalation training, and my question was, my suggestion was that perhaps those officers should take the lead in those kinds of calls. That was a recommendation.
Agreed, and it would be ideal if they could. May I suggest to you, it would have to be confirmed by the rest of this commission, I'm just one of us here today, that it might be possible that we could refer those questions to a policy and planning long-term committee to discuss. And those matters could be taken up as underlying principles that APD would work with us to discuss, understand, and perhaps enact. And that might be a partial resolution to that which you're requesting, rather than the IRO writing it into today's letter, that we as a commission and a body could handle it in a slightly different way, but quite formally. And
Well, sir, that's what I think we're trying to get at, is that the PLC, this is the moment. This is the one time you guys can get together and say, we do have something to say. We do have, we do want to step forward. We really want to know what's going on, and we really want to try to fix things. But it can't happen if we're small people. I respect you for volunteering your time. I've been a volunteer too, and I know how frustrating it is. Here you are, trying to do a good community service. Then you have the task force monitoring what you're doing. And at that meeting, they're telling us that you have no power, that you're this, that you're that. And then why come here? Well, we come here because we believe in you. That's why we come here.
Thank you for your exhortations, Ms. Bautista. Are there other questions? Commissioner Foster.
Commissioner Shine?
Let's not direct to Commissioner
Well,
Shine.
there are certain things that my fellow commissioners said to you this evening that we are not able to do now. We are, as I understand it, we are able to act upon your appeal, and they're either to confirm and uphold what the IRO has said or not. That is solely what we are able to do. Nothing else, ma'am.
I understand that.
I'm concerned.
Okay, are there
Commissioner
other
Foster,
questions?
thank you for your interjection, sir.
Commissioner Shine.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a brief statement of how I view this case and ask for a response from Ms. Bautista, because I don't want her to walk away from this podium having a misimpression.
Brief is the operative.
Thank you. Ms. Bautista, first, I understand how you and your colleague could be very upset by having 4 armed police officers in your, and fairly large ones at that, in your home. The question, though, is whether there was any wrongdoing, by those police officers. I mean, at one point you suggested they were screaming. The videotape makes it clear that they were not screaming at any time, that they were trying to, it appeared to me, trying to be reasonable. You were concerned about an invasion of your house, of your castle. You cited a couple of cases, with all due respect, none of which are applicable to this situation, Homestead, for example. The basic rule in this country is that generally someone has to have a warrant to enter a house. However, there are exceptions, and one of the exceptions is where an officer has a reason to believe someone's life's at risk in the house. They try to, I hope we all agree that they need to enter the house to try to potentially save a life. And as I understood this whole circumstance, that's what happened here. There was an unfortunate, terrible mistake because of a bad address, which apparently wasn't the responsibility of the officers. But the fact is that what they did in your house struck me when I looked at all 3 tapes, struck me as they were reasonable, they were courteous. You were obviously very upset, and you looked like you were shaking, you were so upset. And perhaps that's understandable, but in terms of the actions of the officers, in my judgment, there was nothing they did here that was wrong or incorrect. They had a legal right to come in when they did, even if you didn't invite them in. There would be an argument that they would have a legal right to come in to try to save a life that they thought someone was trying to commit suicide. So under all these circumstances, I'm going to vote to uphold this appeal, and I want you to know that, and I want you to know the reasons I'm doing that. Not because, believe me, I have serious problems with this whole process, and one of the problems in the appeal process is that we can't compel an officer to come down and give his version. Well, in this case, we don't need that, because we have 3 videotapes that record the whole incident from start to finish. And under the circumstances, it seems to me what the officers did was reasonable. I'm sorry that you got upset. I'm sorry for the mistake, but what they did was reasonable.
Okay, are there substantive questions for Ms. Bautista anymore? Okay, is there a motion on the floor?
Second amended agenda.
Is there a motion? Would someone like to make a motion to?
I'll move, Mr. Chair.
I motion we have open discussion. Any seconds?
I second it.
There we go. My name is Joe Lauer. I have motion. Will you rule on that, sir?
I'm sorry, you what?
Mr. Chair.
I made a motion. You asked for a motion, I made a motion. I motioned for open discussion, it was seconded. My name is Joe Lauer.
This man should be removed from the,
You asked for a motion, I motioned.
he's out of order.
There was a second. There's a motion on the floor.
There is a rule against disrupting our meeting, sir.
You asked for a motion, I motioned. I'm a citizen.
I would like to ask that he be escorted outside.
After they rule on the motion. That's fair. You're police officers. He asked for a motion, I motioned. May I have my bag, please? Can they rule on the motion?
5-minute recess. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Recess for 5 minutes.
He asked for a motion, I asked for a motion. Good, hi Sean. Good. David, have you adjourned them? Have you adjourned that? I'm sorry. Let's talk here. Are you detaining me? No, you're not. Let's talk here. Okay, am I being detained? I believe you're right. You seconded it. Thank you. I'm not fighting you. We're not fighting each other. Let's go step outside.
CPC 147-112.
And deny the appeal.
And deny the appeal.
Okay. Is there a second? Second. Okay, Commissioner Peterson, is there discussion? Commissioner Foster?
Chair, I was under the impression that we've already approved this. Are we here to approve it again or to deny it?
Well, we're denying the appeal and upholding the IRO's letter.
So it's not an approval, it's upholding.
Yes, officers, not knowing that it was the wrong house, went in to save somebody's life. And we can only imagine what was going through their heads. They thought they were trying to save a suicidal person's life. And I want officers to be able to act quickly and do that. I think if we could rerun the tape and do it again, it might be done slightly differently, slightly more politely. I particularly, frankly, acknowledge a quote that you made, and it's on the tapes, "Don't make this a bigger deal than it already is seems stifling to you, and this seems awkward." And that might have been stated more delicately and so forth, but also they were trying to get off and find somebody who might really need them to save her life. And I understand why they'd be in a hurry to do that. It's my intention then to vote to deny the appeal, as we've said. But whenever it's appropriate, as soon as we can, I would like to ask the chair's indulgence that we refer the matters requested by the appellants to the Long-Term Planning Committee for discussion and review. And at least the two matters that I'm requesting referral on are a request that cadets and recruits not go to suicide calls, and a review of that, and a request that de-escalation officers be on hand and be ready to be dispatched in a primary way when possible. And if we can indulge in reviewing that, I think we go a long way toward resolving the reasons for the complaint and for the appeal. Lastly, I want to say it strikes me as a mediator that this case could have been mediated away to the satisfaction of all parties, so that the officers involved would not have had a problem on their record and what might be nightmarish for them. Here they're trying to save somebody's life, and now they find themselves in a bureaucratic nightmare. Meanwhile, the complainants are terrified and also upset, and could have talked calmly with the officer in a calm setting of mediation. mediators, and I really regret that that has not happened.
So did we.
Okay, so is there any other discussion about the motion at hand?
I wish to comment to my esteemed colleague.
No.
So
It's
he-
time to vote on
Wait a
the
minute,
motion.
Mr. Chair, so he can say something and I'm not able.
Mr. Foster, you are out of order.
Thank you.
It's time to vote. We are voting to deny, the motion is to deny the appeal and uphold the letter, the IRO. Everyone in favor, please raise your right hand. Any opposed? It is unanimous. Okay, we are moving on to the findings by the CPCs. Ms. Hammer?
Yes, the first case I present is CPC 87-12.
Pardon me, Ms. Batista, we are finished with you, thank you.
Right, well, I appreciate that. I was waiting to hear that. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Ms. Hammer?
CPC 87-12 involves a case in which the complainant was driving a motorcycle. He alleged that the officer veered into his lane and that he could have caused a wreck from the person with the motorcycle driving. A complete investigation was done in which the complainant was interviewed and the officer was interviewed, and it was determined that there was not enough evidence to determine one way or another to prove or disprove the allegation, and I made a finding that the alleged violation against Officer B was not sustained. Chief Banks and the chain of command of the Alpha Police Department agreed with my findings. I asked them to adopt the letter as written.
I move the approval of CPC 87-12. Is there a second? Mr. Barker, is there discussion? Commissioner Burrell?
After reviewing this letter, I actually disagree with the findings of not sustained. I do know that the standard is a preponderance of evidence, which is a little more than 50-50. In the letter, it states that there is no cooperation from the citizen witness. However, also in the letter, it talks about the CAD Communication Center, saying that Officer B logged in at 2:13 and he was in dispatch till 3:16. The allegation was from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. And I do think that corroborates that he was in that area at that time on duty and not dispatched to a specific residence. Also, he didn't deny the incident. He said he couldn't remember. So I take issue with the non-sustained finding of this letter based on that.
Commissioner Shine?
Mr. Chair, I think it's appropriate. Is the investigator here who did this investigation? I'd like to ask a question of that investigator.
He's outside dealing with the disturbance.
Maybe she could get him. I concur fully with Commissioner Barella. When you talk about a balance of testimony, there's no balance of testimony here. So is it Investigator Scotchman who was the investigator on this? This is the motorcycle case?
So it is an IA investigator who is not here.
Okay, well, it seems to me that if the citizen was credible, he says the officer cut him off, and the officer says he doesn't remember. The officer's not contesting that. It seems to me that the preponderance of the evidence is in favor of the citizen, and just because it's a citizen who's saying this happened, particularly when the officer doesn't deny it, I don't see how you can say it's not sustained. And it would be helpful from my perspective if the investigator was here, so we could ask him the question. The investigator the question, was the citizen credible? If he wasn't credible, then that's a different matter. That's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Siegel?
Two different points. First off, I had noticed the same points that the previous two commissioners noted. I would add that the complainant lists and describes the incident in great detail, describing what lane, then another lane, and what happened, sort of inch by inch, moment by moment. It's, on paper, an extremely believable and credible complaint. And the only rebuttal not recall the incident. I don't see how that can be called a 50-50, and I think that it should be revisited and rewritten as a sustained complaint. That's the first piece. The second piece I have is, I'm still puzzled about this. This is a complaint received July 18, 2012 for a complaint that occurred a little earlier. Why is this taking so long to come to us? We're supposed to be hearing these promptly, and I don't understand the backlog. And this was apparently referred out to IA, not even done in our IRO's office. But what's with the backlogs? We still have too many stale cases.
Do you have a response to that, Sam?
Which, to which?
To the, why is there a backlog?
There is a backlog because when I took office in September 5th, 2012, there were approximately 5 months in which there was an interim IRO. During the term of the interim IRO, a large backlog occurred. Upon my arrival at the first POC meeting that I attended in September 2012, there was a motion made to totally revamp and rewrite and redo every single thing that was in the pipeline based on new standards, which I do not disagree with, but which were implemented by commissioners who are currently still on the commission. Based on the new standards set forth and approved by motion by the POC, everything that was in the pipeline in mid-2012 was redone as far as the writing of the letters. This created a huge backlog. That backlog still exists today, and we're continuing to work to resolve it.
May I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
Do you need more staff?
Yes.
Would you need another full-time staff in perpetuity, another half-time staff? This is something we need to work out on behalf of the citizens.
I think that in order to have a timely manner, that we would need, in my estimation, at least a paralegal level, if not an attorney level position that can assist with the processing of drafting of the CPC letters. In addition, we would need one extra full-time investigator so that no case is referred to the Albuquerque Police Department Internal Affairs Division. When the Internal Affairs Division does a case, they make no recommendations, and so therefore internal investigation cases even take longer within my office because it's 100% of my time that works on making the conclusions in the case. So APD does us a favor by gathering evidence, and I think it's appropriate that they don't make conclusions in their cases, but their cases are, the person that deals with those cases is me. So, yes.
Okay, so you need 2 more full-time employees to clear the backlog and then keep it clear.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Foster.
My fellow commissioners, as we have received this opinion from our attorney, we are here to do one of 2 things. We either confirm her opinion or we do not confirm her opinion. We're not here to be editors of her document. We're here to confirm or not confirm. I personally get a little upset when we take up our time in relation to talking to her about grammatical errors and other things. That's her job. That's not my job. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to vote?
Can I just say one thing with respect to the substantive matter?
Yes.
There was a statement by a complainant. There was a statement by an officer which denied the statement. That is a 50-50, not a preponderance of the evidence. I do not judge the credibility of the witnesses because I personally do not interview them. I read a statement. It is the practice of myself that when there are 2 conflicting statements, that is not 51%. Just because somebody filed a complaint does in fact not make it true. When the officer says he doesn't remember the complaint, that is a denial of the allegation. Therefore, I would submit that this case is not sustained as the appropriate finding.
Yes.
Ms. Hamel, I don't understand. At least the way I read this is that he said he did not remember the incident. I'm not clear where the denial comes in. Did he deny that there was an incident with this motorcycle, or did
He denied it occurred in that he had no memory of it occurring, so therefore it did not occur. I mean, he did
Is
not.
that what he said? He said it did not occur, he said, I don't remember. So there's a difference, it seems to me, between saying, that never happened, or saying, I don't remember. If I might point out, Mr. Chair, what we're talking about here is not a grammatical error. There's a motion.
I'm waiting, I think.
He says he does not recall ever seeing a motorcycle on that day in question.
Well, that is different than saying there was no, it didn't happen.
Okay, let's let the commissioners make up their mind whether it's sustained or not. Let's proceed with the vote. All in favor of affirming CPC 87-12, please raise your right hand. All opposed? There are 3 opposed, 4 in favor.
The next case is CPC 144-12, in which a gentleman who was not present at the time complained about a police officer coming to his front door and the police officer interviewing his 81-year-old mother about an incident involving a car that was located near the house. The IRO investigator interviewed the complainant, the son of the woman who was interviewed. The son had absolutely no interactions with the officer, just what his mother told him. He also interviewed the officer and reviewed the lapel camera. Based on the review of the lapel camera, I found that the complaint was not not substantiated, and that the officer's conduct should be exonerated. The chain of command reviewed the entire file. Agreed with my findings. I asked you to affirm the letters written.
I move the approval of CPC 144-12. Is there a second? Mr. Foster, is there a discussion? Commissioner Stein.
Ms. Hammer, in the second page of the letter, you said the gentleman stated he had only one side of the story and that the lapel video would be helpful. Do you know whether he ever was given access to the lapel video?
No, I do not know that. We don't
If
routinely
he
give
had
them.
been, he just might have withdrawn the complaint. I don't know. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Barker.
It's apparent that everything was done correctly as far as the lapel cameras and things. The problem is that there was an alleged complaint a week or so earlier, and we dispatched the police officer to the home at 23:40 in the evening and would bang on somebody's door. I don't think that was in accordance with any standard operating procedure anyway. If it is, please correct me. But I think that's it.
The call was called out at 8:25, and the officer showed up 2.5 hours later, an hour and a half later.
But the complaint was from 2 weeks earlier, and so then the officer gets a call at 8 something at night and waits 2.5 hours till almost midnight to go knock on somebody's door.
But I don't think that we get to decide that when someone receives a phone call that we can wait when it comes in that evening. Typically, when people call the police, they want a response that evening. And it's unfortunate that it was a low priority call and that the officer came later. But the call came at 8:25 at night. It didn't come at 8:25 in the morning.
Correct. But my point being is that the call was about an incident weeks earlier. Is that correct or am I mistaken?
I believe that's a misstatement.
Okay. Let me take a look at this again. It says,
Earlier in the evening, the same day.
Are we ready? Commissioner Siegel.
yeah.
Thank you. I did review the tape at the IRO's office yesterday, and woman in question here repeatedly asked, "Can't we do this another time? It's awfully late. Can I?" Part of the call references to her daughter, who isn't there at the time, and she says, "Can I have my daughter call you at some other time?" And the officer says, "I only work graveyard, so you really got to talk to me and me only." Is that how it works, that once this call gets dispatched, from then on, the people contacted can only do it whatever graveyard times are? Or is there a way to sort of refer that out to a different officer at a better time of day?
It depends on the nature of the call, Commissioner. Calls will hold. A low priority call holding for 2 hours is not uncommon, unfortunately, just at the nature of the city, nature of call load.
Understood.
The officer responded to the call and started asking pertinent questions, and sometimes maybe it's now inconvenient for the people, but we need to figure out what exactly is going on at that particular moment. Because usually people don't call the police just to chat. They call the police because they need service, they're in trouble. So him making the comment, "Can we do this at a more appropriate hour?" Or I'm sorry, her making the comment in his response is he's working graveyard, that he would not be allowed and wouldn't be, he's the investigating officer, he can't come back at, let's say, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, which might be more convenient for the caller because he's not working. The type of call, it's not really appropriate to hold it longer. It's already held for 2 hours, it needs to be dealt with. And so that's why he made that statement, that's sort of the procedure.
The incident in question was a parked car and another car bumps it. And there's some question about the facts, which is important here today. But the driver apparently wasn't in the house. So the woman repeatedly says, "It's awfully late, can't my daughter call you?" That would be the driver of the car tomorrow. Couldn't that person be referred to somebody else at APD at a more normal time? Or does that officer who first responded state they were resolving this case, there was no more emergency? I think that from my best understanding, the officer reasonably ascertained what was going on.
The officer has to do some investigation.
Right.
He's got to find out what exactly is going on. Many times the initial complaint that we receive, that when someone calls in, is not necessarily what exactly is always going on. So the officer has to conduct a preliminary investigation at that moment to determine, is this just a simple parking issue, car issue, or are there other things going on?
And all of that happened, and that went just right, just like you're saying. But the real question is, could the officer say, "Oh, sure, you ought to have your daughter call somebody else in the morning, somebody else in the afternoon"?
I think this is not really pertinent to the letter. Let's proceed with the vote.
All right.
All in favor of affirming CPC 144-12, please raise your right hand. Okay. All opposed? Mr. Barker's opposed.
The next case is CPC 168-12. The complainant alleged the officer harassed her while she... I'm sorry, did I skip one?
This is 163-12.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was on the wrong one. They coming. I'm 163-12 is the next case. 163-12, there was complaints that there was driving, that the complainant was driving, he was pulled over, and that he objected to the pat down and his length of detention and the handcuffs as applied. The complainant was interviewed, the officer was interviewed, the prisoner transport lieutenant interviewed, the file video was reviewed. I concluded, based on reviewing of all of this evidence, that the officer complied with the procedure for pat down and should be exonerated. And with respect to the PTU unit officer, that his actions should be exonerated as well. Chief Banks and the chain of command of the ABQ Police Department reviewed the entire file and agreed with my findings. I ask you to adopt the letter as well.
Okay. Commissioner Shine.
May I ask, may I point out that on page 5 of the letter, it talks about under the exonerated, under the pat down paragraph, it talks about a Terry Frisk being for weapons, drugs, and/or contraband, and And as you know, that's not really correct. It's the Terry frisk is only for weapons. So I'd suggest you may, it's not an accurate statement to say drugs and contraband and other contraband. But can I ask Lieutenant Jordan, in this issue of Terry pat-down, are officers trained to, because it'd be hard to hide a weapon in your groin next to your genitals, a male's genitals, it would seem to be, but are the officers trained to come in contact with the male genitalia during a Terry frisk?
All officers are trained in proper search techniques, including the groin area on male and females, and you would be surprised, Commissioner, how people can hide things and where. So yes, they are trained, and it's an appropriate area to search because weapons can be located in that area of the body.
Weapons are there, but they're trained so that it's consistent with the policy and the training to come in physical contact with the male genitalia.
In the groin area.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Yes, under appropriate circumstances and appropriate techniques, they are trained, yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I move the adoption of CPC 163-12. Is there a second? Second. Is there any more discussion? All in favor, please raise your right hand. It is unanimous.
The next case is 168-12. The complainant alleged that an officer harassed her when she was downtown with her child. The IRO investigator interviewed complainant, the officer, and two officers. There was no video at the time taken, but they were not required to do so at the time that this incident occurred. There was conflicting statements between the officers and what the complainant alleged, and so I found that as to both officers that there was not enough evidence to prove the allegation one way or another and not sustained. Chief Banks and the chain of command reviewed the entire investigation and agreed with my findings. I asked that you adopt the letter as written.
I move approval of 168-12. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Foster, is there any discussion? Commissioner Barker?
And we've got a couple of these cases this time. There was no independent evidence available such as belt tape or video recording that would have proved or disproved the allegation. The officers were not required at the time to record the contact. I'm just curious. It has been brought up numerous times. It just seems common sense to click that baby on so you can as we saw earlier in the appeal, if that camera's on, it sure makes things a lot simpler. I don't know why we would put it on.
At the time of this incident, they were not required to do so, and not every officer was given lapel cameras at this time, at the time of this incident.
Okay. I move the adoption. Have I already done that? Yeah, that's right. Okay, any other discussion? Yes, Commissioner Seaver.
Briefly, I think the case was another one where mediation would have been an excellent way of resolving the problem. Thank you.
Okay, let's vote. All in favor of approving CPC 168-12, please raise your right hand. Any opposed? It is unanimous.
The next one.
I've been asked that we have a 5-minute break, a short 5-minute break for necessities.